People do not usually lose respect for you because you are weak. They lose respect for you because they can feel how badly you want to be liked. And that is a painful thing to discover because most of us were taught the opposite. Be kind, be easy, be agreeable, make people comfortable, keep the peace, smile even when something feels wrong, say yes a little too fast, laugh at things that were not funny, answer messages you did not want to answer, stay available, stay pleasant, stay useful. Then one day, without anybody announcing it, you notice something ugly. The more you try to be liked, the less seriously people seem to take you. They come to you when they need help, but not when they need honesty. They enjoy your warmth, but they step over your limits. They expect your understanding, but offer very little of their own. And when you finally speak up, they look surprised, almost offended, as if dignity was a role you were never supposed to play. That surprise tells you everything. I once knew a man who could enter any room and immediately begin shrinking himself. Not physically, socially. He had that habit many decent people have. He would scan faces, measure the mood, and then become whatever version of himself seemed easiest to accept. With louder people, he became quieter. With insecure people, he became smaller. With selfish people, he became generous in ways that were almost sad to watch. He was competent, thoughtful, dependable, the sort of man employers praise and friends call one of the good ones. Which sounds lovely until you hear the rest of the sentence people never say out loud. One of the good ones. One of the ones who won't make trouble. One of the ones who will understand. One of the ones we can ask again. He was not hated. Far from it. People liked him very much. That was the problem. He was the first person called when someone needed a favor on short notice. The first person expected to adjust. The first person asked to be reasonable. He lent money he could not comfortably spare. He changed plans to suit people who would never change theirs for him. He answered late-night calls with that tired politeness of a man afraid that saying no might cost him his place in someone's life. And for a while, he mistook usefulness for love. Many people do. Because being needed can feel dangerously close to being valued. They are not the same thing, but from the inside, they can feel almost identical, especially if you grew up believing your worth had to be earned by being easy, helpful, or emotionally convenient. That is where this begins for a great many people, not in adulthood, much earlier. A child learns very quickly what keeps the room calm. Maybe one parent was unpredictable. Maybe affection was generous one day and withdrawn the next. Maybe praise came when the child was mature beyond their years, quiet when others needed noise, cheerful when the house felt heavy. So the child becomes skillful, very skillful, reading the air, anticipating disappointment, managing other people's comfort before their own. Later, the world applauds this adaptation and calls it kindness. Sometimes it is kindness. Sometimes it is fear in a clean shirt. That man I mentioned did not realize this at first. He thought his exhaustion was just adulthood. He thought resentment was a private flaw. He thought his loneliness was bad luck. But resentment is rarely mysterious. It usually appears where self-betrayal has been happening for too long. You can feel it in small moments. When you say yes and immediately feel tired. When someone jokes at your expense and you smile half a second too late. When you give thoughtful effort to people who offer crumbs in return. When you rehearse honest sentences in the car, then walk inside and say something softer. It accumulates quietly, like dust in a room no one opens. The turning point came, as these things often do, in a small, unimpressive moment. Not a dramatic betrayal, not a thunderstorm of truth. Just a Tuesday evening, a phone buzzing on a kitchen counter, and another request from someone who always had emergencies but never seemed available when anyone else was struggling. He read the message, stared at it, put the phone down, picked it up again, typed 3 different polite excuses, deleted all of them. Then, for perhaps the first time in years, he wrote a complete sentence that did not beg to be forgiven. I can't do that tonight. No explanation that ran for 6 lines, no invented scheduling conflict, no warm little performance designed to soften the blow, just the truth, clean and civil. I can't do that tonight. He told me later that his hands were shaking more from guilt than fear. That is how deeply approval can wire itself into the body. People speak of confidence as though it lives in the mind alone. It does not. It lives in the throat when you say the difficult thing. It lives in the stomach when you disappoint someone and remain standing. It lives in the spine when you do not collapse into over-explaining. The reply came back colder than he expected. That too taught him something. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries often call your first boundary a personality change. They may say you have become distant, proud, difficult, unkind. They may act confused because your previous obedience had become part of the furniture. It made their life comfortable. When furniture begins speaking, people get unsettled. Now this is the part many miss. That first wave of disapproval can trick you into thinking you have done something wrong. In reality, it may be the first honest evidence that you are no longer playing the old role. Respect often arrives wearing the mask of resistance. Not always immediately, not from everyone. Some people leave, some people sulk, some people test you just to see whether this new version of you is real or temporary. Human beings are excellent at testing what they do not fully believe. But if you hold steady, something shifts. The same people who dismissed your time begin asking for it more carefully. The same people who interrupted you start listening a fraction longer. The same people who assumed your agreement begin checking your opinion first. Not because you became harsher, not because you learned some dark trick, because you stopped advertising yourself as negotiable. That is what respect notices first. Not charm, not eagerness, not endless availability. Weight. A person with inner weight moves differently through the world. They do not rush to fill silence. They do not volunteer themselves for every burden just to prove goodness. They do not turn every disagreement into a crisis of self-worth. When they speak, there is less static around the words. And people, even if they cannot explain it, feel the difference. Why? Because human beings are always reading signals beneath language. We watch for what your behavior says about how you see yourself. If you repeatedly act as though your boundaries are optional, your standards flexible, your peace for sale at a discount, people absorb that information. They may still like you. They may even praise you. But deep respect struggles to grow where self-respect is visibly missing. There is another reason this change happens. Approval seeking makes you blurry. When you are trying very hard to be liked, you start editing yourself in real time. You soften opinions before they leave your mouth. You agree too quickly. You pretend not to mind. You nod when you should pause. Over time, people stop meeting a clear person. They meet a moving target built around their comfort. And blurry people are difficult to respect because nobody can quite feel where they begin or end. This does not mean you should become cold, theatrical, or needlessly difficult. Some people, after a lifetime of pleasing, swing too far in the other direction. They mistake rudeness for strength. They confuse emotional numbness with maturity. They start saying, "I'm just being honest," when what they really mean is, "I have not learned how to speak truth without spilling my pain on the carpet." That is not dignity. That is backlash. Real self-respect is quieter than that. It does not need to slam doors. It simply stops holding them open for people who never reach for the handle. Think about the people you genuinely respect in your own life. Not the flashy ones, not the loud ones, the truly solid ones. There is usually something steady about them. They do not fish for approval. They do not collapse under mild disapproval. They can be warm without becoming porous. They can help without becoming available for misuse. They can love without kneeling. That last part matters. Many people hear a message like this and secretly worry it means they must become less loving, less generous, less open-hearted. No. The goal is not to become hard. The goal is to stop leaking yourself. There is a difference between kindness and submission, and life becomes much simpler the day you stop confusing the two. Kindness says, "I care." Submission says, "Please do not leave." Kindness gives because it chooses to. Submission gives because it is afraid to stop. Kindness can survive a no. Submission panics at the thought of one. Once you see this clearly, whole sections of your past begin rearranging themselves. You remember conversations differently. You understand why certain friendships always left you strangely tired. You see why some romances felt less like love and more like a permanent audition. You notice how often you called anxiety loyalty. It can be a hard realization. A little humiliating, if we are honest. Nobody likes admitting they were performing goodness in exchange for safety, but honesty has a wonderful habit of making room where denial only made fog. The man I knew did not transform overnight. People rarely do. He did not wake up one morning with a heroic jawline and perfect boundaries. He still hesitated, still over-explained sometimes, still felt that old sting when someone withdrew warmth after hearing no. But he began catching himself earlier. He stopped apologizing for preferences that harmed no one. He stopped replying instantly to every message as if delay itself were a moral failure. He stopped volunteering for tasks just to avoid the discomfort of watching someone else be disappointed. He started leaving a few silences unanswered. He started telling the truth in smaller doses, more often. That is how most real change looks. Not grand, repetitive. And slowly, the social map around him changed. A friend who used to interrupt him began listening more closely. A relative who leaned on guilt found it less effective and, quite remarkably, learned to ask more directly. At work, his opinions started landing differently. Same voice, same intelligence. But there was less apology in the room around him, and people could feel it. Here is the uncomfortable beauty of that. He did not become more valuable in that period. He became more visible. The value had been there all along. It was just buried under accommodation. This is why some of the nicest people you know are also the least respected. They have trained others to receive them as background comfort. Warm lighting, reliable furniture, pleasant music. Important, perhaps, but not fully human in the minds of those who rely on them. And then, when these gentle people finally draw a line, everyone acts shocked. No, my dear friend. What is shocking is how long they lived unseen. There is plain psychology behind this, though it sounds almost too simple. The human mind takes consistency very seriously. When someone consistently abandons themselves to keep the peace, others come to expect that pattern. The brain saves energy by turning your self-sacrifice into a rule. That is just how you are. The agreeable one, the easy one, the one who won't push back. Then when the pattern breaks, people pay attention. Part of what they are reacting to is uncertainty. A person who has finally decided to respect themselves becomes less predictable in one very specific way. They can no longer be counted on to betray themselves for social comfort. And that changes the atmosphere. People begin approaching them with a little more care, not because they are scared, because the person has become real. Reality commands attention. There is also something deeply ironic here. The more you need to be liked, the harder it becomes for others to relax around you in any meaningful way. They may enjoy you, yes. They may even keep you close. But underneath, they can feel the transaction. They can sense that your agreement is not always agreement, that your smile is sometimes a protective arrangement, that your generosity arrives carrying a quiet hope of being chosen. This creates strain, even when nobody names it. A person who no longer begs for approval becomes easier to trust. Strange, isn't it? The one who can tolerate not being liked is often the one who finally feels honest, and honesty has texture. People lean toward it. If you want a clear sign that approval seeking is running your life, look at what happens when someone is mildly disappointed in you. Not furious, not cruel, just disappointed. Do you feel a simple discomfort and move on? Or does your nervous system react as if the floor has opened beneath you? Do you start mentally bargaining? Do you offer extra explanations no one asked for? Do you rush to make yourself lovable again? That reaction is revealing more than the situation itself. For many people, the fear is not really conflict, it is exile. Some old part of them still believes that disapproval means disconnection, and disconnection means danger, so they keep smoothing, agreeing, proving, pleasing. But adult life asks something harder and healthier from us. It asks us to survive being misunderstood. A great deal of maturity begins there. When you can survive being briefly misread, briefly disliked, briefly excluded from someone's good mood, you stop living at the mercy of every room you enter. Your character starts to belong to you again. You stop renting it out. That is when respect becomes possible, because respect is not given to the person who performs best under social pressure. It is given, slowly and quietly, to the person who remains themselves under it. You need not become dramatic about this. In fact, the more theatrical the change, the less grounded it usually is. You do not need to announce your new standards like a king unrolling a decree. You do not need a speech, a manifesto, or a cold stare over coffee. Often it is smaller than that. A slower yes, a calm no, a message answered tomorrow, a joke not laughed at, a favor declined without a novel attached, an opinion spoken before checking every face in the room for permission. These are tiny acts on the outside. On the inside, they can feel like moving a mountain with your bare hands. Still, move it. Because every time you act against your deepest self to secure approval, you send yourself a message. The message is not abstract. It lands somewhere old and tender. It says, "Their comfort matters more than my truth." Repeat that often enough, and eventually you begin to believe it. Then you wonder why confidence never quite settles in. Confidence does not grow well in soil watered by self-betrayal. It grows when your actions start matching what you know, when your mouth and your spine finally meet, when you become somebody your own nervous system can trust. There is peace in that. Real peace, not the flimsy kind built on everybody else being pleased with you. The sturdy kind. The kind that lets you sit alone in a quiet room without mentally replaying every sentence you spoke. The kind that lets you say no and then make tea, rather than say yes and spend the evening resenting the ceiling. That man eventually told me something I have never forgotten. He said, "I thought people would love me less if I stopped trying so hard. Some did. But the strange thing is, I finally stopped disliking myself." That is a very high price to stop paying. And this is the truth beneath the whole matter. Being liked is pleasant. Of course it is. We are social creatures. Warmth matters. Connection matters. Nobody sensible is arguing for a life of unnecessary friction. But if being liked requires you to keep abandoning your own edges, then what people like is not quite you. It is the edited version, the convenient version, the version that asks for little and absorbs much. There comes a point when a grown soul gets tired of that arrangement. If this message finds you at the exact moment you are exhausted from being the understanding one, the flexible one, the one who always sees the other side, then let me say this carefully. Your kindness is not more noble when it is mixed with fear. Your patience is not more virtuous when it is built on self-erasure. Your softness is not more beautiful when it costs you your voice. People may not applaud the first day you stop bending. Some may push back. Some may leave. A few may reveal that they never respected your heart, only your compliance. Good. Better to know the truth while there is still time to live by it. And the ones worth keeping, they will adjust. They may even respect you more than before, because now they can finally meet a whole person instead of a careful performance. So, if you have been trying to earn respect by being endlessly agreeable, stop. That road leads to exhaustion. Wearing a polite face. Speak a little more plainly. Delay the reflex to explain. Let one person be disappointed without rushing to rescue the moment. Sit still through the discomfort. You may discover that the world does not end when approval slips through your fingers. Something better begins. Tell me honestly, when did you first realize that being liked was costing you something?